The auction block. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the platform like a whip, but the crowd stayed silent. On the weathered board stood a pregnant woman with hollow eyes and a little girl who wouldn't speak. 2 lives nobody wanted, offered to the highest bidder in a town that had already judged them guilty. The rancher at the back of the crowd hadn't planned to stop. His wagon wheel had other ideas. Now Wade Harlan stood with his last $20 weighing heavy in his pocket, watching shame play out in broad daylight, and something in his chest that had been dead for 3 years started to burn. If you're watching from somewhere in this wide world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will change everything these 3 broken souls thought they knew about mercy, judgment, and what it means to choose family when the whole town says you shouldn't. The wheel cracked just past the town limits, a sound like a bone breaking that Wade felt more than heard. He'd been riding the brake hard down the slope, trying to make Benton's crossing without stopping, but the wagon had other plans. The iron rim split clean through, sending the whole rig lurching sideways with enough force to rattle his teeth. Hell. The word came out flat, resigned. Wade set the brake and climbed down, boots hitting packed earth that hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks. Dust rose around his ankles like something guilty trying to hide. The gelding stamped, impatient. Wade ran a hand down the horse's neck, steady, automatic, then crouched beside the ruined wheel. The wood had split along a grain line he should have noticed 2 months back. Should have replaced it in Laramie. Should have done a lot of things. He straightened, squinting against September sun that felt personal in its heat, and looked toward town. A 1/4 mile of rutted road, storefronts bleached gray by weather and neglect, and the kind of quiet that meant everyone was somewhere else, somewhere together. The sound reached him then, voices, too many of them, gathered like crows. Wade hesitated. He'd planned to pass straight through Benton's crossing without so much as watering his horse. The town had a reputation for being hard on strangers and harder on anything that didn't fit its narrow ideas about how decent people ought to live. But the wheel wasn't giving him a choice, and the wheelwright's shop sat dead center of whatever was drawing the crowd. He unhitched the gelding, left the wagon where it sagged, and started walking. The gathering filled the space between the general store and the land office. Maybe 60 people pressed together in a horseshoe shape. Men in work-stained shirts, women in calico faded to ghosts of color, children weaving between legs like they sensed something ugly and wanted to see it up close. At the center, on a makeshift platform of stacked crates, stood the auctioneer. Wade stopped at the back of the crowd, tall enough to see over most heads. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice like gravel scraped over iron, and he was sweating through his collar despite the dry heat. "Now, folks," the man called, "we all know the situation. Sheriff Doan's made it clear. The county's done paying room and board, and these 2 need placement before winter sets in." Wade's gaze shifted to the platform. The woman stood with her spine straight and her chin level, but her hands gave her away. They shook where they rested on her swollen belly, fingers spread like she was trying to hold something together that kept threatening to come apart. She wore a dress that might have been blue once, mended so many times the original fabric barely showed through the patches. Her dark hair was pulled back severe and simple, revealing a face too young for the exhaustion carved into it. Beside her, a little girl stood perfectly still. The child was maybe 7, thin as a willow switch, with pale hair that caught the light like spun flax. She wore a dress 3 sizes too big, cinched at the waist with twine, and she stared at the crowd with eyes that didn't blink, didn't move, didn't show a damn thing. "Starting bid," the auctioneer announced, "is room and board for both until the baby comes, plus whatever work the woman can manage. Child's quiet, won't be trouble. Now, do I hear?" Silence. Wade felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard of this, frontier auctions when the county poorhouse overflowed, or when families needed placing and nobody stepped forward. Legal, barely. Common enough in territories where charity was a luxury and survival came first. That didn't make it right. "Come now," the auctioneer tried again, forcing cheer into his voice. "Woman's young, healthy enough despite her condition. Child's well-behaved, could help with, she's bad luck." The voice came from the front, a woman in a brown dress with a face like weathered fence wood. "Everyone knows it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, agreement spreading like wind through dry grass. Her husband weren't cold 2 months before she showed up pregnant, another voice added. Tell me that ain't suspicious. The woman on the platform didn't flinch, didn't defend herself, just stood there with her hands on her belly and her eyes fixed somewhere above the crowd, like she'd learned that trying to explain would only make things worse. The little girl moved then, barely, just her hand reaching sideways to grip a fold of her mother's skirt. Wade's chest tightened. Look, the auctioneer said, desperation creeping in now. I ain't asking for charity. You'd be getting labor in exchange for… Labor? A man in a leather vest spat tobacco juice into the dust. Woman that far along can't hardly work, and the child don't speak. What use is that? She speaks, the woman on the platform said. Her voice was quiet, but clear, carrying a certainty that cut through the noise. When she wants to. Well, she ain't wanted to in 6 weeks, the vest-wearing man shot back. That's what Doc Brennan says. Child ain't spoken since they got here. More murmurs, heads shaking. The crowd was turning, the way crowds do when they've already decided the ending and just want permission to walk away from it. Wade looked at the little girl again. She still hadn't moved, hadn't changed expression, but her knuckles had gone white where they gripped her mother's dress. $15. The words came out of Wade's mouth before he'd decided to say them, before he'd even thought them through. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked. I'm sorry, did someone… $15, Wade repeated, louder now. He stepped forward, the crowd parting reluctantly to let him through. Room and board through winter, plus the 15, cash. The woman on the platform looked at him for the first time, and Wade saw her eyes, gray as storm clouds, wide with something between hope and terror. That's… The auctioneer cleared his throat. That's a generous offer, Mr. Harlan. Wade Harlan. Recognition flickered across a few faces. Wade had passed through Benton's Crossing once, maybe twice, years back. Enough to be remembered as the rancher from up north who kept to himself and didn't cause trouble. Mr. Harlan, the auctioneer continued, relief flooding his voice. That's more than generous. Do I hear? You won't. The woman in the brown dress folded her arms. No one here's fool enough to outbid him for that kind of burden. Wade kept his eyes on the auctioneer. Then we're done. The thin man hesitated, looking to the sheriff, a barrel-chested man with a star pinned to a vest straining at its buttons. The sheriff gave a single nod. Sold, the auctioneer said, relief and distaste mixing in his tone. To Wade Harlan for $15 cash and provision through winter. Wade pulled the bills from his pocket, all he had left after selling his last 2 steers in Laramie, and handed them over. The auctioneer counted them twice, nodded, and made a notation in a ledger that looked like it had survived a flood. They're your responsibility now, the sheriff said, stepping close enough that Wade could smell old coffee and tobacco. Anything goes wrong, it's on you. Nothing's going wrong. Wade said it quiet, final. The sheriff studied him, then shrugged. Your funeral. The crowd was already dispersing, the entertainment over. Wade heard fragments of conversation. Fool and his money. Won't last the winter. See how charitable he feels when that baby comes. But he didn't turn around. He walked to the platform instead. The woman watched him approach, one hand still on her belly, the other now resting on her daughter's shoulder. Up close, Wade could see the fine tremor running through her, the exhaustion bruising the skin under her eyes, the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow. I've got a wagon outside town, Wade said. Broken wheel. I'll get it fixed, then we'll head out. She opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed. Her voice cracked. She tried again. I don't even know your name. Wade Harlan. I've got a ranch about 30 miles north. Clara. She said it like an offering. Clara Voss, this is Lily. Wade looked down at the little girl. She stared back at him with those 2 still eyes, weighing him the way a wild thing weighs a trap. Lily, Wade said, nodding to her like she was worth the acknowledgement. The girl's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition, maybe. The knowledge that he'd seen her, We don't have anything, Clara said. No belongings, no. That's fine. Wade cut her off, not unkind. I've got what's needed. He stepped back, giving them space to climb down. Clara moved carefully, one hand braced against the crate, the other steadying herself on Lily's shoulder as she descended. The little girl moved with her, automatic, a dance they'd practiced too many times. They stood together at the base of the platform, this woman carrying a child and leading another, both looking at Wade like they weren't sure what happened next. Wade wasn't sure either. He'd bought them. That was the legal truth of it, written in the auctioneer's ledger and witnessed by half the town. But he'd never owned another person and didn't plan to start. What he'd bought was time. Time for Clara to have her baby without the county selling her again. Time for Lily to be a child instead of a bargaining chip. Time for Wade to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with 2 lives he'd just made himself responsible for. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the wheelwrights. Let's get that wheel fixed. They followed him through town, and Wade felt every eye on them. Felt the weight of judgment, curiosity, and the particular kind of meanness that comes from people who've convinced themselves that cruelty is just common sense. At the wheelwright shop, a man with arms like tree trunks and a face carved from skepticism looked at the broken wheel, then at Wade, then at Clara and Lily, standing quiet in the shop's shadow. $2, the wheelwright said, and it'll take 3 hours. Wade had $2.17 left to his name. He handed over the bills without comment. 3 hours, the man repeated, already turning to his work. Wade led Clara and Lily to the side of the building where a bench sat in the shade. You can rest here. I'll get the wagon hitched once it's ready. Clara lowered herself onto the bench like every bone hurt. Lily sat beside her, still silent, still watching. Wade stood there a moment, awkward in a way he hadn't felt in years. You eaten today? Clara's hesitation was answer enough. Stay here, Wade said, and headed for the general store before she could protest. Inside, the shopkeeper, a woman with gray hair pinned tight and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile, gave him a look that could have stripped paint. But she took his last 17 cents in exchange for a loaf of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and 2 apples without comment. Wade brought the food back and set it on the bench between Clara and Lily. It's a long ride, he said by way of explanation. Clara stared at the food like it might vanish. Then she broke the bread in half, gave the larger piece to Lily, and took a small bite of the cheese herself. Wade turned away, giving them privacy for a hunger that felt too intimate to witness. He spent the next 3 hours checking the gelding, organizing the wagon bed to make space for passengers, and ignoring the stares that followed him every time he moved through town. By the time the wheelwright finished, the afternoon sun had started its slow slide toward evening. Wade paid with a promise, work and trade, next time he came through, that the wheelwright accepted with a grunt that might have meant agreement or dismissal. He hitched the wagon, tested the new wheel, and brought the rig around to where Clara and Lily waited. Clara stood when she saw him, one hand pressed to her lower back. Lily stood with her, a shadow that had learned to anticipate movement before it happened. It's about 30 miles, Wade said as he helped Clara into the wagon bed. We'll camp partway if you need to rest. We can make it, Clara said, but her voice was thin. Wade lifted Lily up next. She went stiff as a board when he touched her, but didn't pull away, and settled her beside her mother on the blankets he'd laid out. Then he climbed onto the bench, released the brake, and guided the gelding north out of Benton's Crossing without looking back. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open country that rolled toward distant mountains in shades of gold and rust. The road was rough, rutted by spring rains and baked hard by summer sun, and the wagon creaked with every turn of the wheels. Wade kept the gelding to a steady walk. Behind him, he heard Clara murmuring something soft to Lily, heard the little girl shift on the blankets. But mostly there was just the sound of hooves on dirt, the wind moving through dry grass, and the weight of 3 people who didn't know each other trying to figure out what they'd just become. An hour out of town, Clara spoke. Why did you do it? Wade didn't turn around. Wheel broke. Needed fixing. That's not what I mean. He knew what she meant. He'd been asking himself the same question since the auction, and the only answer he had felt too simple to be the whole truth. But it was the truth he could name. Didn't seem right, Wade said. Leaving you there. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady rhythm of travel. You don't know me, Clara said finally. You don't know what they say is true or not. Don't care what they say. You should. Her voice was hard now, edged with something that might have been anger or fear or both. I'm pregnant. My husband's been dead 2 months. His brother's been hunting me since. That's not gossip. That's truth. You bought trouble, Mr. Harlan. You need to know that. Wade was quiet for a long moment, letting her words settle. Then he said, Trouble's got a name? Jacob Voss. He dangerous? Yes. You know where you were? Not until today, but he'll hear. Town's talk. Wade nodded slowly. Then I guess we'll handle it when he shows up. Just like that? Clara's voice rose, disbelief sharp in it. You don't even know me, and you're willing to, what, fight my battles? Risk your land, your life for... I ain't fighting your battles, Wade interrupted. He still didn't turn around, but his voice was steady, certain. If he comes for you on my land, that makes it my business. That's all. Clara went quiet again. Wade could feel her trying to make sense of him, this stranger who'd spent his last dollars on 2 people he'd never met and didn't seem particularly concerned about whether it was wise. Truth was, Wade didn't have a good explanation. 3 years ago, he'd lost his wife to fever and his daughter to the same sickness 2 weeks later. He'd buried them both on a hillside overlooking his ranch, and he'd spent every day since working until his hands bled and his mind went numb. He'd stopped planning for anything beyond the next fence that needed mending, the next winter that needed preparing for. He'd stopped seeing people mostly, stopped going to town except when supplies ran low, stopped caring about anything that required him to feel more than he could stand to feel. But standing at the back of that crowd, watching a woman and child be sold like livestock while good people convinced themselves it was necessary, that had broken through the numbness. Not with feeling, exactly, but with clarity. This was wrong. He could stop it. So he had. The rest, what happened now, what it meant, where it led, Wade didn't have answers for any of that. He'd figure it out the same way he figured out everything else. One day at a time, one problem at a time. Behind him, Lily made a small sound. Not a word, but a noise. Questioning, maybe, or just noticing something. Wade glanced back and saw the little girl pointing at a hawk riding the thermals overhead, wings spread wide against the darkening sky. Red tail, Wade said. Hunting. Lily looked at him, then back at the hawk. Her expression stayed neutral, but she kept watching until the bird disappeared beyond a ridge. They traveled until the sun touched the horizon, painting the western sky in shades of amber and blood. Wade found a spot where a creek ran shallow over smooth stones, cottonwoods offering shelter from the wind that rose with evening. He helped Clara down. She was moving slower now, one hand constantly braced against her back, and lifted Lily after. While Clara walked stiffly to the creek, Lily at her side, Wade unhitched the gelding and rubbed the horse down, then gathered enough deadfall to build a small fire. By the time he had flames going, Clara and Lily had returned. They sat close to this fire, close to each other, watching him with identical expressions of careful neutrality. Wade pulled cornmeal and dried beef from his supplies, mixed the meal with water in a small pot, and set it over the fire to cook. It wasn't much, barely qualified as food, but it was hot, and when he handed Clara a tin plate full of mush and a few strips of beef, she took it with hands that shook. She gave half to Lily without taking a bite herself. Wade refilled the plate and handed it back. She's fed. Eat. Clara stared at the food. I can't. You can. Wade's voice was gentle but inflexible. Baby needs it. You need it. Eat. Clara's eyes filled. She blinked hard, turned away, and ate. They finished the meal in silence. Wade cleaned the pot and plates in the creek, while Clara settled Lily in the wagon bed, wrapping her in blankets that smelled like horses and dust. By the time he returned to the fire, Clara was sitting on the tailgate, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. You should sleep, Wade said. Long day tomorrow. Where will you? I'll keep watch, first part of the night anyway. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the auction. Wade met her gaze and saw her trying to reconcile what he'd done with what she expected from men, trying to find the catch, the angle, the price she'd be expected to pay. I'm not going to hurt you, Wade said quietly. Not going to touch you. Not going to ask for anything you don't offer. You're safe here. Both of you. Clara's breath caught. For a moment, Wade thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just nodded once, stood carefully, and climbed into the wagon beside her daughter. Wade sat by the fire long after they'd gone quiet. He fed the flames, watched the stars wheel overhead, and listened to the night sounds. Crickets, the creek's murmur, the gelding's occasional snort. At some point he heard Lily whimper, heard Clara's soft voice soothing her, singing something low and wordless that might have been a lullaby or might have just been the sound of a mother trying to convince her child that the world could be kind. Wade looked into the fire and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. But he didn't regret it. That was the strange part. He'd spent 3 years regretting everything, every choice, every moment, every breath that his wife and daughter didn't get to take. But this reckless choice made in a dusty town square felt like the first thing he'd done in years that actually mattered. Maybe it was stupid. Probably it was. But it was done. The fire burned low. Wade added more wood, wrapped himself in his coat, and settled in to wait for morning. When dawn came pale and cold, Wade woke Clara and Lily with the smell of coffee boiling over renewed flames. They ate quickly, more cornmeal, the last of the bread, and packed up while the sky shifted from gray to gold. The final stretch to the ranch took 4 hours. The land rose gradually, sage and grassland giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper. Wade's property started where a fence line marked the boundary, posts weathered gray and wire rusted but holding. The house came into view just after midday. It was small, single-story, log construction, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. The barn stood 50 yards off, larger than the house, its roof patched in places but solid. A corral held 2 horses that lifted their heads as the wagon approached. A chicken coop, a well with a peaked roof, a garden plot gone mostly to weeds, signs of a place that had been cared for once and was now just maintained. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. He stood there a moment, seeing the place through Clara's eyes, the isolation, the work it would take to make it comfortable, the loneliness soaked into every weathered board. "It's not much," Wade said, "but it's sound, keeps the wind out." Clara was staring at the house like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "This is yours?" "Has been for 8 years. Lily was looking at the horses." Wade moved to the back of the wagon and helped Clara down, then lifted Lily after. The little girl's gaze stayed locked on the corral, where a paint mare was stretching her neck over the fence, curious. "You can meet them later," Wade said to Lily, "if you want." Lily looked at him, didn't nod, didn't speak, but something in her eyes eased, just slightly. Wade led them to the house and opened the door. Inside, dust motes danced in light from the windows. 2 rooms, a main space with a cook stove and table, and a smaller bedroom off to the side. Simple furniture, all of it built by hand. Clean enough, but bare, functional. Clara stood in the doorway, taking it in. "Where—" She stopped, started again. "Where should we—" "Bedroom's yours," Wade said. "Both of you. I'll sleep in the barn." "You don't have to—" "I do." Wade's tone was final. "You need privacy. I need space. Barn's got a loft. I've slept there before." Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She just nodded. Wade showed them where things were. The well outside, the privy behind the house, the woodpile, the cellar where root vegetables and preserves were stored. Then he left them to settle in while he took care of the horses and unpacked the wagon. By evening, Wade had moved his bedroll and few personal items to the barn loft, brought in enough wood to last Clara and Lily a few days, and shot a rabbit that he cleaned and left on the porch with a note. For supper. He stayed in the barn after that, giving them space, giving himself space to think about what happened next. He had 2 women under his roof now, one pregnant, one silent, both carrying trauma he didn't fully understand. He had a ranch that barely supported 1 person, let alone 3. He had winter coming, supplies running low, and a brother-in-law hunting them who might show up any day. And he had no idea what he was doing. But in the barn loft, with hay under him and the smell of horses below, Wade felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. It was fragile, uncertain, maybe foolish, but it was there. In the house, lamplight glowed soft through the windows. Wade could imagine Clara and Lily inside, navigating a space that was strange but safe, figuring out how to exist without fear breathing down their necks. He hoped they could sleep tonight, hoped they could rest. Tomorrow would come soon enough with all its questions and complications. But tonight, 3 people who'd been alone were alone together, and that was something. Wade closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. The distant sound of Clara's voice, reading to Lily, maybe, or just talking softly, following him down into sleep like a promise he hadn't made but might someday be able to keep. The first 3 days passed in a silence that felt like negotiation. Wade rose before dawn each morning, moving through his routines with the steady rhythm of a man who'd learned that work was the only reliable thing in the world. He fed the horses, checked the fence lines, split wood until his shoulders burned. He kept his distance from the house, respecting the boundary he'd drawn, only approaching when necessary, to leave firewood on the porch, to bring in water from the well, to hang a rabbit or prairie chicken he'd shot for their supper. Clara received these offerings without comment, but Wade noticed the changes. The porch swept clean. His shirts, worn and mended carelessly by his own rough hands, now showed careful stitching where tears had been properly repaired. A pot of coffee left warming on the cook stove when he came in at midday, 2 cups set out instead of 1. She never stayed when he entered. She'd retreat to the bedroom or step outside to tend the small garden plot she'd started clearing, Lily always at her side. But the evidence of her presence accumulated. The house smelled like something other than dust and loneliness now, like bread and soap and the particular kind of care that comes from someone trying to earn their place in the world. Wade didn't ask for any of it, didn't expect it, but he accepted it the way she accepted his hunting, his silence, his careful distance, as proof that they were both trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without damaging each other. Lily was the mystery. The little girl moved through the ranch like a ghost, pale and silent, watching everything with those 2 old eyes. She followed Clara everywhere at first, never more than an arm's length away, her small hand always finding some piece of her mother's skirt or apron to grip. But on the 3rd morning, Wade found her standing at the corral fence, staring at the paint mare with an intensity that made him slow his approach. "That's Sage," Wade said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "She's gentle, won't bite." Lily didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him, but she didn't run either. Wade leaned against the fence a few feet away, giving her space. Sage had wandered over, curious about the small human who stood so still, and now the mare stretched her neck across the top rail, nostrils flaring as she investigated Lily's scent. The little girl lifted one hand, slow and careful, and held it out flat. Sage's nose touched her palm, velvet soft, breath warm. Lily's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something that might have been wonder. She stood frozen, barely breathing, as the horse explored her hand, her wrist, the sleeve of her too big dress. Wade watched, motionless. He'd seen Clara's desperation, her exhaustion, her brittle strength, but this was the first time he'd seen anything in Lily except careful blankness, this small flicker of curiosity, of connection. It felt fragile as spider silk, and Wade was terrified of breaking it. After a long moment, Lily lowered her hand. Sage snorted softly and moved away, returning to the other horses. Lily stayed at the fence, watching, and Wade stayed beside her, not speaking, just bearing witness to whatever had just happened. When Clara called for breakfast, Lily turned and walked back to the house without a word. But the next morning, she was at the fence again. And the morning after that. By the end of the first week, a routine had formed without anyone discussing it. Wade worked the ranch, Clara worked the house, and Lily divided her time between her mother and the horses. They existed in careful orbit around each other, held together by unspoken agreements and the strange comfort of shared silence. But silence couldn't last forever. On the 8th day, Clara found Wade mending fence behind the barn and stood watching until he noticed her. When he looked up, she had her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm afternoon, and her face carried the same expression she'd worn on the auction platform, braced for impact. "We need to talk," she said. Wade set down his tools and straightened, waiting. Clara glanced back toward the house, where Lily was visible through the window, drawing something in the dust on the table. Then she looked at Wade directly, and he saw her gathering courage like someone preparing to jump from a height. You've been kind, Clara said. Kinder than anyone's been in a long time. You've given us shelter, food, safety. You haven't asked questions. You haven't... She stopped, swallowed. You haven't touched me. Haven't looked at me like I owe you something. Wade kept his expression neutral, sensing there was more coming. But I need you to understand what you've taken on, Claire continued, her voice gaining strength. Because it's only fair you know the whole truth before Jacob shows up. And he will show up. I know he will. Do you know why? Clara's laugh was bitter. It's not because he loved my husband. Jacob and Thomas barely spoke. It's not because he cares about me. He made it clear from the day Thomas brought me home that he thought his brother married beneath him. It's because Jacob Voss doesn't believe women have the right to choose anything, not who they marry, not where they live, not whether they want him. Wade's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. When Thomas died, Claire said, Jacob showed up at the funeral and told me I was his responsibility now. Said it was his duty to take care of his brother's widow and child. Made it sound noble. But the way he looked at me, she shook her head. He didn't want a sister-in-law. He wanted property. You ran. I ran. Took Lily and what little money Thomas had hidden, and I ran. But Jacob followed. Every town I stopped in, he'd find me within a week. He has friends, connections, and he has the law on his side, or thinks he does. Widows have no rights, Mr. Harlan, especially widows carrying babies from men who aren't their husbands. Wade went very still. The baby isn't Thomas's. No. Clara met his eyes, unflinching. Thomas died 4 months ago. I'm 5 months along. You can do the math. Who's the father? Does it matter? Might, if he's going to come looking. Clara's smile was cold. He won't. He's dead. Died 2 days after Thomas, same fever. They were friends, worked the same mine, got sick the same week, both dead within 10 days. Wade absorbed this, piecing together the timeline. So Jacob thinks I was unfaithful while Thomas was sick. Thinks I got pregnant through sin, and that gives him even more right to control me. To save me from myself. Clara's voice shook with anger now, not fear. The truth is Thomas knew. The baby's father was his best friend, and they both knew they were dying. Thomas made James promise to take care of me. James promised. Then they both died and left me alone with a child, a pregnancy, and Jacob hunting me like I was something he'd lost. Wade picked up his hammer, turned it over in his hands. The metal was warm from the sun, solid, real. He focused on it while he processed what Clara had told him. You think I'll judge you, he said finally. Everyone else has. I'm not everyone else. Wade set the hammer down and looked at her. Your husband and his friend both died. You were left pregnant and alone. You ran from a man who wanted to own you. That's not sin, Clara. That's survival. Something in Clara's face cracked, just for a moment. She turned away, one hand pressed to her mouth, and Wade heard her breathing hard through her nose, fighting tears. He waited. When she turned back, her eyes were bright but dry. I needed you to know, she said, before Jacob comes, before he tells you his version and makes me out to be, I don't care what he says. You should. Clara's voice was fierce now. He'll make it sound reasonable. He'll say he's protecting his family's honor, providing for his brother's widow, doing his Christian duty. He'll say I'm unstable, immoral, unfit to raise children, and people will believe him because he's a man with property and I'm a pregnant widow who ran away. Wade considered this. How many times did he hit you? Clara froze. What? You flinch when I move too fast. You watch doors like you're planning escape routes. And you just told me Jacob thinks he owns you. Wade's voice was level, factual. So I'm asking, how many times did he hit you? Clara's hand went to her arm, rubbing a spot Wade couldn't see. Twice. Once when I said I wouldn't marry him. Once when I tried to leave the first time. She paused. He broke my arm the second time, told the doctor I'd fallen. The doctor believed him. Wade felt something cold and deliberate settle in his chest. It wasn't rage. Rage was hot, uncontrolled. This was colder, more patient. When he comes, Wade said, you stay in the house. You keep Lily inside. And you let me handle it. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling you how it's going to be. Wade picked up his hammer again, tested its weight. This is my land. That makes you my responsibility, and Jacob Voss doesn't get to hurt people on my land. Clara stared at him, and Wade saw her trying to reconcile his calm tone with what he'd just said, trying to figure out if he meant it or if this was just talk. I mean it, Wade said, answering the unspoken question. He comes here, he leaves understanding that you're not available. Not now, not ever. However, I have to make that clear. He's not. Clara stopped, started again. He's not reasonable, Wade. He doesn't listen to logic or threats. He believes he's right, and that makes him dangerous. Then I'll speak in a language he understands. They stood there in the afternoon sun, the half-mended fence between them, and Wade saw Clara making a decision. Saw her weighing his words against every other promise a man had made and broken, measuring his silence against Jacob's violence, calculating whether Wade Harlan was someone she could trust, or just another man who'd use her until it stopped being convenient. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Wade nodded and returned to his work, and Clara walked back to the house. But something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, and the silence between them felt less like strangers avoiding conversation and more like people who didn't need words to understand each other. That night, Clara called him to supper. It was the first time she'd done so directly, her voice carrying across the yard as Wade finished putting the horses in for the night. He washed at the well, scrubbing dirt from his hands and face with the harsh soap Clara had made from lye and fat, then entered the house. The table was set with 3 plates. Lily sat in one chair, watching him with her steady, unblinking gaze. Clara stood at the cook stove, ladling stew into bowls, rabbit, potatoes, wild onions, thickened with flour, and seasoned with herbs she must have found growing somewhere on the property. Wade took his seat, and Clara served them all before sitting down herself. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lily picked up her spoon, and the adults followed. The stew was good. Better than good. It was the kind of meal that carried memory in it, care in every bite. Wade ate slowly, savoring it, and when he looked up, he found Clara watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It's good, Wade said. Really good. Clara's shoulders lowered slightly, tension easing. There's more if you want it. I want it. She smiled then, small and brief, but real. Across the table, Lily was eating steadily, her attention apparently on the food, but Wade noticed she kept glancing between him and her mother, measuring the temperature of the room. After supper, Wade helped clear the table. Clara protested, but he ignored her, and washed the dishes while she put Lily to bed. He heard their voices through the bedroom door, Clara reading from a book she must have brought with her, her tone soft and rhythmic. Lily didn't speak, but Wade heard the rustle of blankets, the small sounds of a child settling into sleep. When Clara emerged, Wade had finished with the dishes and was standing by the door preparing to return to the barn. Wade, Clara said, stopping him, thank you for listening today, for all of it. Don't need thanks. I know, but I'm giving it anyway. She crossed her arms, hugging herself again. I've been thinking about what you said, about handling Jacob, and I need to tell you, he won't come alone. He never does. He'll bring men from town, maybe the sheriff. He'll make it official, legal. He's smart that way. Doesn't matter how many he brings. Answer's the same. Clara hesitated. I don't want you to get hurt because of me, because of choices I made before I ever met you. Wade looked at her, this woman who'd been sold on an auction block and still had the strength to worry about someone else. Clara, listen to me. I bought you and Lily because it was the right thing to do. I'm protecting you now for the same reason. This isn't charity, and it's not because I expect something back. It's because leaving people to suffer when you can help is the same as causing the suffering yourself. I won't do that. Not anymore. Not anymore? Clara's voice was gentle, curious. Wade's throat tightened. He hadn't talked about Mary and Sarah in 3 years, hadn't said their names aloud, hadn't let himself think about them for more than the few seconds it took to place flowers on their graves each Sunday. But Clara was looking at him with those gray eyes, patient and kind, and the words came anyway. I had a wife, Wade said, Mary, and a daughter, Sarah. She was 6. There was a fever 3 years back, swept through the territory. Mary got sick first. I rode for the doctor, but he was 2 towns over dealing with an outbreak there. By the time I got back, Sarah was sick too. They died within 2 weeks of each other." Claire's hand went to her mouth. "Wade, I spent the next year blaming myself," Wade continued, his voice flat. "Thinking if I'd ridden faster, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, if I'd done something different, they'd still be alive. Took me a long time to understand that some things can't be fixed by working harder or being better. Some things just happen, and all you can do is decide what kind of person you'll be after." "So you decided to be kind." "I decided to be useful, to help when I could, to not turn away from people who needed it just because it was inconvenient or risky." Wade met her eyes. "That's all this is, Clara. Me trying to be useful." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're more than useful, Wade Harlan. You're good. And that's rarer than you think." Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back. "Clara, you and Lily, you're welcome here. Long as you need to stay, past winter, past the baby coming, past whenever Jacob stops hunting. This isn't temporary unless you want it to be." Clara's eyes filled, and this time she let the tears fall. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because the house has been empty too long," Wade said. "And because you deserve a place where nobody's selling you, hurting you, or making you smaller than you are. That's all." He left before she could respond, crossing the dark yard to the barn. Behind him, lamplight glowed in the house windows, and Wade imagined Clara standing in that warm light, maybe believing for the first time that safety could be more than temporary. In the loft, he lay in his bedroll and stared at the ceiling beams. Tomorrow he'd ride to Benton's Crossing, stock up on supplies before winter closed in. He'd ask around about Jacob Voss, find out what kind of man he was dealing with, and he'd start preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. But tonight, he let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, maybe foolish. But there. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wade worked the ranch with renewed purpose, fixing things he'd let slide, preparing for winter with 3 people in mind instead of 1. Clara continued transforming the house into something that resembled a home, and Lily slowly, incrementally, began to trust. The little girl's trust showed in small ways. She started standing at the corral fence when Wade was working with the horses, watching as he brushed them down or checked their hooves. One morning, she appeared beside him while he was milking the cow he'd bought from a neighbor, and she didn't run when he showed her how to guide the stream of milk into the pail. She still didn't speak, but her eyes followed Wade now with curiosity instead of fear, and once, when he'd cut his hand on a piece of wire, she'd brought him a clean cloth without being asked. Clara noticed. Wade saw her watching from the porch or the garden, saw relief and something like gratitude softening the hard edges she carried. She was changing too, moving easier, smiling more, the constant vigilance fading degree by degree. 2 weeks after the auction, Wade rode to town. He left at dawn, telling Clara he'd be back by evening, and made the trip in good time. Benton's Crossing looked the same as before, dusty, sparse, suspicious of strangers, but this time Wade had a purpose beyond supplies. He bought flour, sugar, coffee, bolts of fabric for Clara to make proper dresses for herself and Lily, salt, ammunition, lamp oil. The shopkeeper took his money without comment, but Wade felt eyes on him the whole time. At the saloon, he nursed a single whiskey and listened to the talk around him. It didn't take long to hear Jacob Voss's name. "Heard he's been asking around," a cowhand was saying to his companion. "Looking for his sister-in-law. Says she stole from him when she ran." "That the pregnant one got auctioned off?" "Same one. Voss is saying the rancher who bought her don't know what he's gotten into. Says she's trouble, and he aims to collect her before winter." Wade kept his expression neutral, his eyes on his drink. "When's he coming?" the second man asked. "Week, maybe 2. He's gathering documentation, getting the law on his side. Smart, that. Can't just take a woman these days without paperwork." Wade finished his whiskey and left, the conversation churning in his gut. He stopped by the sheriff's office next, a calculated risk, and found the barrel-chested man behind a desk piled with papers. "Harlan," the sheriff said, not standing. Surprised to see you back so soon. Thought you'd be busy with your new acquisitions. Just stocking up for winter, Wade said evenly. Wanted to let you know everything's settled at the ranch. No problems. Good to hear. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying Wade. You expecting problems? Should I be? The sheriff smiled, thin and knowing. Depends. You heard Jacob Voss is looking for his sister-in-law? I've heard. He's got legal standing, you know. She's family, and she took off with property that belongs to the Voss estate. He's within his rights to claim her. Wade kept his voice level. She's not property, and she's under my protection now, legal, witnessed, and paid for. Auction like that, it's about provision, Harlan, not ownership. Voss could argue you were just covering her room and board temporarily. Then let him argue it in court, but he's not setting foot on my land to collect anyone. She doesn't want to go, she's not going. The sheriff's smile faded. You willing to make that a legal battle? Because Voss has resources, connections. You're just a rancher who couldn't mind his own business. I'm a rancher protecting people under his roof, Wade corrected. That's my business. And if Voss or anyone else tries to change that, they'll find out exactly how serious I am about it. The silence stretched between them, tense and measuring. Finally, the sheriff shrugged. Your funeral, Harlan. Just don't expect the law to back you when Voss shows up with papers and witnesses. Don't expect the law at all, Wade said. Never have. He left before the conversation could turn uglier, mounted his horse, and rode north with the supplies and the knowledge that time was running short. A week, maybe 2. That's all the warning he had. Back at the ranch, he found Clara in the garden and told her everything he'd heard. She listened without interrupting, her hand stilling on the weeds she'd been pulling. So it's coming, she said when he finished. It's coming, but we'll be ready. Clara looked at the house where Lily was visible through the window, playing with a corn-husk doll Clara had made. I won't let him take her. I'll fight him, Wade, with everything I have. I know, but you won't have to fight alone. She looked at him then, and Wade saw steel in her gray eyes. I've been running for months. I'm tired of running. When Jacob comes, I'm going to stand my ground. With you, if you'll let me. But I'm not hiding anymore. Wade nodded, respect filling his chest. Then we'll stand together, and we'll make damn sure he understands that no means no, law or not. That night, Clara didn't retreat to the bedroom after supper. She stayed at the table while Lily drowsed in her lap, and she and Wade talked, really talked, for the first time. About Mary and Sarah, about Thomas and James, about the lives they'd lived before grief and circumstance had brought them to this small ranch in the middle of nowhere. And when Lily finally fell fully asleep, Clara carried her to bed and returned to sit across from Wade one more time. Whatever happens, Clara said, thank you for giving us this, even if it's only for a little while. It's not just for a little while, Wade said. I meant what I said, Clara. You're welcome here. For good, if you want. Why? She asked again, softer this time. Why us? Why this? Wade thought about it, really thought. Because 3 years ago I buried everyone I loved and spent every day since just existing, working, surviving, but not really living. And then I saw you on that platform, and something in me woke up. Something that remembered what it felt like to care about something more than fence lines and feed schedules. You didn't ask for my help, Clara, but helping you, it's helping me too, reminding me there's more to life than grief. Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm, calloused from work, and Wade felt that simple touch all the way through. Then we'll help each other, she said, through whatever comes, together. Together, Wade agreed. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of distant rain. Inside, lamplight flickered soft and steady, and 2 people who'd been alone learned what it felt like to have someone standing beside them when the storm finally broke. The fire came on the 5th night after Wade's trip to town. He woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of the horses screaming. Wade was out of his bedroll and down the loft ladder before his mind fully caught up, boots hitting packed earth as he ran for the corral. Orange light flickered against the barn walls, and for one terrible moment he thought the barn itself was burning. Then he saw the source, a hay pile 50 yards out, flames climbing into the night sky like something hungry. The horses were wild-eyed, stamping and tossing their heads. Wade got the gate open and drove them out toward the open pasture, away from the fire and the smoke that was already thickening the air. Sage went first, the paint mare taking the others with her in a thunder of hooves that faded into darkness. Wade ran for the well, grabbed the bucket, and started hauling water. The fire had caught good, fed by dry grass and wind, spreading faster than one man could stop it. But he tried anyway, throwing water on the edges, beating at flames with a soaked blanket, working with the desperate focus of someone who knew that if this fire reached the house, everything would be gone. Then Clara was beside him, another bucket in her hands, her nightdress soaked and clinging. She didn't speak, just fell into rhythm with him. Fill, run, throw, repeat. Over and over, their breath coming in gasps, ash stinging their eyes. Lily appeared on the porch, a small silhouette backlit by lamplight from inside the house. She stood frozen, watching her mother and Wade fight the fire, her corn-husk doll clutched tight against her chest. It took an hour to kill the flames. By the time the last embers were drowned, Wade's hands were blistered, his throat raw from smoke, and his muscles shaking with exhaustion. Clara sank to the ground beside the blackened circle where the hay pile had been, her face streaked with soot and tears. Wade stood over the burn site, studying the ground. The fire hadn't started itself. The night was calm, no lightning, no accident, and there, at the edge of the char, he found what he was looking for. Hoof prints, fresh, leading away to the south. "He's here," Clara said. She'd seen the prints too. "Jacob's here." Wade said nothing, just looked toward the dark hills where the rider had disappeared. The message was clear. "We can reach you anytime. We can hurt you without facing you. You're not safe." But the message went both ways. Now Wade knew Jacob Voss wasn't interested in legal channels or civilized confrontation. He was interested in fear, in control, in breaking Clara's will before he ever showed his face. Wade walked back to where Clara sat and offered his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. Her whole body was shaking. "Take Lily inside," Wade said quietly. "Lock the doors, keep the lamp low. I'm going to check the property." "Wade, I won't go far. Just need to make sure there's no one else out there." Clara looked at him, fear bright in her eyes, but she nodded. She walked to the house, gathered Lily into her arms, and disappeared inside. Wade heard the bolt slide home, solid and final. He spent the next 2 hours walking the fence lines with his rifle, checking the barn, the outbuildings, every shadow that could hide a man. He found nothing but those hoof prints leading away, proof of the violation but no target for his anger. By the time he returned to the barn, dawn was breaking pale and cold. Wade climbed to the loft, lay down without removing his boots, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to the fire, to how close it had come to the house, to what might have happened if he'd woken even a minute later. Jacob Voss was making his intentions clear, and Wade needed to make his own intentions clearer. When full light came, Wade found Clara in the kitchen, making coffee with hands that trembled despite her obvious efforts to steady them. Lily sat at the table, pale and silent, watching her mother with worried eyes. "Coffee's ready," Clara said, her voice carefully neutral. Wade poured 2 cups and sat across from Lily. The little girl's gaze fixed on him, searching his face for something, reassurance maybe, or a promise that the fire wouldn't come back. "Your mama and I need to talk," Wade said to Lily. "But first, I need you to know something. That fire last night, it was meant to scare us, to make us afraid, but we're not leaving, we're not running. This is our home, and we're going to protect it. Do you understand?" Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. It was such a small gesture, but it hit Wade like a fist to the chest. This child who hadn't spoken in weeks, who'd been dragged from town to town by a mother trying desperately to keep them both alive. She understood what he was saying, and she trusted him enough to believe it. Clara's breath caught, and when Wade looked up, he saw tears streaming down her face. "He's not taking her," Clara said, her voice breaking. "He's not taking either of us. I don't care what papers he has or what the law says. I'll die first." "It won't come to that." Wade kept his tone level, certain. "But we need to be smart about this. Jacob's testing us, seeing how we react. Next time he comes,
It won't be in the dark. It'll be direct. What do? We prepare, and we make sure that when he shows up, we're ready to meet him on our terms, not his. Wade spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the property.
He moved the remaining hay into the barn where it could be watched, cleared brush away from the house to create a fire break, and positioned buckets of water at strategic points. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and made sure his revolver was loaded and within easy reach. Clara worked alongside him when she could, her pregnancy slowing her but not stopping her. She filled water barrels, organized supplies, and kept Lily close and occupied. The little girl helped where she was able, carrying small items, watching the horizon with those steady, vigilant eyes. By afternoon, Wade's hands were bleeding from work, but the ranch looked different, more defended, more deliberate. He was checking the barn one last time when he heard hoofbeats. Wade's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw, not yet. He walked to the front of the barn and saw 4 riders coming up the road at an easy pace, not attacking, not rushing, just riding in like they had every right to be there. The man in front was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his horse with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, and his face was handsome in a hard way, all sharp angles and cold eyes. Behind him rode 3 other men, ranch hands by the look of them, hired muscle with gun belts and expressions that said they'd done this kind of work before. Wade walked into the yard as they approached, his rifle held loose in one hand, not pointed at anyone, but very much present. Behind him, he heard the house door open and knew without looking that Clara had come out onto the porch. The lead rider pulled up 20 feet away and studied Wade with the kind of assessment a man gives a dog he's considering buying or putting down. "You must be Harlan," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated, nothing like the rough frontier drawl Wade was used to. "Jacob Voss. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I don't have anything that belongs to you," Wade said evenly. "My brother's widow, my brother's child, and the baby she's carrying, which I'm told is a bastard conceived in sin while my brother lay dying." Jacob's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's what belongs to me, Mr. Harlan. Family, and I've come to collect them." "They're not interested in being collected." Jacob's gaze shifted past Wade to the porch, and his expression changed, something possessive and ugly flickering across his features. "Clara, it's time to stop this foolishness. You've embarrassed yourself and dishonored Thomas's memory long enough. Come down here. Bring Lily. We're going home." Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. "I am home, and you're not welcome here." "You don't get to decide that." Jacob's tone sharpened. "You're a widow with no means and no rights. The law is clear. You're the responsibility of your husband's family, which means you're my responsibility. I've been patient, Clara. I've given you time to come to your senses. But that time is over." "She's told you no," Wade said, stepping slightly to the side to block Jacob's view of the porch. "That's all the answer you need. Now get off my land." Jacob's attention snapped back to Wade, and for the first time real anger showed in his eyes. "Do you understand what you've involved yourself in? This woman is a liar and a whore. She seduced my brother's best friend while Thomas was on his deathbed. She got pregnant with another man's child and tried to pass it off as legitimate. And when I offered her the protection of my name and home, she stole from me and ran. That's not what happened." Clara's voice was shaking now, but she held her ground. "You know that's not what happened, Jacob. Thomas and James were both dying. They both knew it, and they—" "Shut your mouth." Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. "I won't have you spreading your lies in front of witnesses. You'll come with me now, or I'll take you by force. The law is on my side." "The hell it is." Wade raised his rifle now, not pointing it directly at Jacob, but making the threat clear. "You want to try taking anyone off this property? You'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, Jacob, that's not going to end the way you think." The 3 men behind Jacob shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. But Jacob held up one hand, stopping them. "You're making a mistake, Harlan," Jacob said, his voice dropping to something cold and certain. "I have documentation proving Clara is my responsibility. I have witnesses who'll testify to her immorality. I have the law, the church, and every decent person in this territory on my side. You're just one man with a rifle and a misguided sense of chivalry. You can't win this." "Maybe not," Wade said, "but I can make sure you don't win it either. Jacob's jaw tightened. He stared at Wade for a long moment, then looked past him to Clara again. "This isn't over. I'll be back with the sheriff, with legal documents, with everything I need to take what's mine. And when I do, Harlan, you'll either step aside or you'll hang for interfering with lawful custody. Your choice." "My choice is already made," Wade said. "Now get the hell off my land before I forget I'm trying to be civilized about this." For a moment, Wade thought Jacob would push it. Thought he'd give the order to his men, thought this would end in gunfire and blood right here in the yard. But Jacob was smarter than that. He knew Wade had the defensive position, knew that charging a man with a rifle while Clara and Lily were witnesses would be hard to justify, even with the law on his side. So Jacob did something worse. He smiled. "Enjoy your last few days of playing house," he said. "When I come back, I'll have papers signed by a judge. And if you're still standing between me and my family, I'll have you arrested for kidnapping and theft. Think about that while you're pretending to be a hero." He wheeled his horse around, his men following, and rode back down the road at the same easy pace they'd come. Wade stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, his finger still resting on the trigger guard, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he finally turned around, he found Clara on the porch steps, Lily clutched against her side. Clara's face was white, her whole body trembling, but her eyes were fierce. "He meant it," she said. "He'll come back with papers. He'll make it legal." "I know." "Wade, if he has a judge's signature, if the sheriff backs him up, you can't fight that. They'll arrest you. They'll take us anyway, and you'll end up in jail or worse." Wade climbed the porch steps and stood in front of her, close enough to see the fear and fury warring in her expression. "Clara, listen to me. Clara, listen. I don't care what papers Jacob brings. I don't care if the whole territorial government shows up with badges and warrants. You told him no. That's the only law that matters to me. And I will stand between you and him for as long as it takes for him to understand that no means no." "But no buts." Wade's voice was gentle but inflexible. "You think I haven't thought about this? You think I don't know what I'm risking? I do. And I'm choosing it anyway. Because what Jacob's trying to do isn't about law or family or protecting anyone. It's about control. It's about making you small and powerless because he can't stand that you said no to him. And I won't be part of that. Not now, not ever." Clara's face crumpled. She pressed one hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs that came anyway. Lily looked up at her mother, then at Wade, her small face pinched with worry. Wade crouched down so he was eye level with Lily. "Your mama's scared," he said quietly. "And that's okay. Being scared is normal when someone's trying to hurt you, but we're not going to let him hurt you. Do you believe me?" Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she lifted one small hand and placed it in Wade's much larger one. Her fingers were cold, fragile as bird bones, but they gripped his with surprising strength. Wade's throat tightened. He squeezed her hand gently, carefully, and said, "That's right. We're in this together, all three of us." He stood, still holding Lily's hand, and looked at Clara. "You need to rest, both of you. I'm going to keep watch tonight. Make sure Jacob doesn't try anything else. You can't stay awake all night. Yes, I can, and I will. Now go inside, lock the door, and try to sleep. We'll figure out the next step in the morning." Clara wanted to argue. Wade could see it in her face, but exhaustion and fear won out. She gathered Lily close and headed inside, pausing at the door to look back at Wade one more time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of it." Wade just nodded, and she disappeared into the house. He spent that night the way he'd promised, awake, alert, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. The hours crawled past, marked by the slow wheel of stars overhead and the occasional cry of a coyote in the hills. But no one came. No fires, no prowlers, nothing but wind and silence. By dawn, Wade's eyes burned with fatigue, but his mind was clear. Jacob would be back, probably within a week. He'd bring papers, the sheriff, maybe more men. And when he did, Wade would be ready. But ready for what, exactly? He couldn't fight the law outright. That would just get him killed or imprisoned and leave Clara and Lily defenseless. He couldn't run with them. Jacob would follow, and being fugitives would only make things worse. And he couldn't convince Jacob to give up through reason or threats. The man was too certain of his righteousness, too invested in winning, which meant Wade needed a different strategy, something Jacob wouldn't expect.
something that would cut the ground out from under his legal standing and force him to back down. The answer came to Wade as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, spilling gold across the valley. Marriage. If Clara was Wade's wife, she wouldn't be Jacob's responsibility anymore. She'd have a husband to speak for her, to claim legal guardianship of Lily, to establish the unborn baby as legitimate. Jacob's entire case rested on Clara being a vulnerable widow. Take that away. And he had nothing. It was a radical solution. Wade barely knew Clara, and she barely knew him. They'd spent 3 weeks in the same space, most of it in careful silence. Marriage would bind them legally, socially, permanently. It would change everything, but it would also save her. Wade turned the idea over in his mind as he walked to the well, washed the night's grime from his face and hands. The more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Not as a romance, they weren't there yet, might never be, but as a partnership, a legal shield, a way to tell Jacob Voss that he'd lost before he could win. The question was whether Clara would agree to it. Wade found her in the kitchen, making breakfast with mechanical precision, her face drawn with sleeplessness. Lily sat at the table, drawing in the dust again, her movements slow and listless. "Clara," Wade said, "we need to talk." She looked up, and Wade saw resignation in her eyes. "He's going to win, isn't he? No matter what we do, he's going to find a way to take us." "Not if we don't let him." Wade sat down across from Lily, giving Clara his full attention. "I've been thinking about Jacob's strategy. His whole case rests on you being a widow with no legal protection. He thinks he can claim you as family responsibility because there's no one else with a stronger claim." "That's right. That's the law." "Then we change the law's application." Wade took a breath. "Marry me." The words hung in the air like something physical. Clara's face went blank with shock, and even Lily stopped drawing to stare at him. "What?" Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Marry me," Wade repeated. "Not for romance or love, or any of the usual reasons. But as a legal protection, if you're my wife, Jacob has no claim on you. You're under my guardianship, Lily becomes my stepdaughter, and the baby is born legitimate. Jacob's entire argument falls apart." Clara sank into the nearest chair, her hand pressed to her chest like she was trying to hold her heart inside. "Wade, that's not fair to you." "Fair has nothing to do with it. It's practical." "It's insane." Clara's voice rose. "You'd be binding yourself to a woman you barely know, taking on a child that isn't yours, and another one coming that isn't yours either. You'd be making yourself responsible for us forever. That's not practical, Wade. That's sacrifice." "I'm already responsible for you," Wade said simply. "I made that choice when I bought you at the auction. This just makes it official in a way Jacob can't fight." "But marriage," Clara shook her head, tears spilling over. "Marriage is supposed to be about partnership, about love, about—" "It can be about a lot of things," Wade interrupted gently. "In this case, it's about survival, yours and Lily's and that baby's. If you have another solution, I'm listening. But if you don't, and if you trust me even a little bit, then this is how we beat him." Clara stared at him, her breathing ragged, her eyes searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or ulterior motive, or the kind of selfishness that would demand payment for this protection. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. "Why?" she asked, and it was the same question she'd asked before, but this time it carried the weight of everything, fear and hope and desperate need, all tangled together. "Why would you do this for us?" Wade looked at Lily, who was watching him with those two old eyes, and he thought about Sarah, about how his daughter had been 6 years old and full of life until fever stole her away. About how he'd failed to save her, failed to save Mary, failed to do anything but bury them and spend 3 years drowning in regret. He couldn't save Sarah. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this little girl who didn't speak and this woman who'd been hurt so many times she expected cruelty from kindness. "Because it's the right thing to do," Wade said, "and because I've spent too long doing nothing that matters. This matters. You matter. So if you'll have me, Clara Voss, I'm asking you to marry me, not because I expect anything from you, but because together we're stronger than Jacob's hate." Clara covered her face with both hands and wept, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Lily climbed out of her chair and wrapped her arms around her mother's neck,
and Wade sat across from them, waiting, giving Clara space to feel everything she'd been holding back. When she finally looked up, her face was blotchy and wet, but her eyes were clear. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Wade saddled the gelding within the hour, leaving Clara with the rifle and explicit instructions to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone came near the house while he was gone. The ride to Benton's Crossing took 3 hours at a hard pace, and Wade spent every minute of it rehearsing what he'd say to the preacher, to the clerk, to anyone who might question why Wade Harlan was suddenly getting married to a pregnant widow he'd bought at auction 3 weeks prior. The truth would sound insane. The lie needed to sound inevitable. He arrived in town just past noon, the sun beating down on dusty streets that looked emptier than usual. Wade tied his horse outside the small church at the edge of town and found Reverend Mills in the garden behind the building, tending tomato plants that had seen better days. Mills was a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands permanently stained with ink from the scripture he copied in his spare time. He looked up when Wade approached, recognition and surprise crossing his face in equal measure. "Mr. Harlan," the Reverend said, straightening with a wince that spoke of a bad back, "I didn't expect to see you in town again so soon. Is everything all right at your ranch?" "Need to ask you something," Wade said without preamble. "Can you perform a marriage today?" The Reverend blinked. "A marriage? Today?" "Yes, sir. Me and Clara Voss, the woman I took from the auction." Understanding dawned on Mills's face, followed by something that might have been approval or might have been concern. "I see. And does Mrs. Voss wish to marry you, or is this another act of charity on your part?" "She wishes it," Wade said firmly. "We both do." The Reverend studied him for a long moment, then set down his gardening tools and gestured toward the church. "Come inside. We should talk about this properly." They sat in the front pew, the church cool and dim after the bright heat outside. Reverend Mills folded his hands in his lap and looked at Wade with the patient expression of a man who'd heard every possible human failing and still chose to believe in redemption. "Tell me the truth, Wade," Mills said gently. "Why are you really doing this?" "Jacob Voss is coming for her," Wade said. "He's claiming legal right to her as his brother's widow. He's already threatened her, already tried to intimidate us. If I marry Clara, he loses that claim. She becomes my wife, under my protection, and he has no legal standing to take her. So this is a defensive measure." "It's a lot of things," Wade admitted. "Protection, yes, but also—" He paused, searching for words. "I care about her. About Lily. They deserve better than being hunted and sold and treated like property. If marriage gives them that, then that's reason enough." "But do you love her?" Wade met the Reverend's eyes. "I respect her. I admire her strength. I want to keep her safe." "Maybe that's not the kind of love you mean, but it's honest. And it's more than most marriages start with out here." Mills was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Jacob Voss is not a good man, despite his respectable reputation. I've heard things about how he treats those under his authority. If Clara is choosing you over him, I'd say she's making a wise choice, even if the circumstances are unusual." He stood. "I'll perform the ceremony, but I need you to understand something, Wade. Marriage is a covenant, not just a legal document. Once you speak those vows, you're bound. Not just in the eyes of the law, but before the community and before your own conscience. You'll be responsible for Clara and her children in every way. Are you prepared for that?" "I am," Wade said without hesitation. "Then let's make this official. Do you have a witness?" Wade hadn't thought about witnesses. He looked around the empty church, mind racing, and then heard the door creak open behind them. Both men turned to find the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Chen, standing in the doorway with a basket of flowers. "I bring these for Sunday service," she said in her accented English, then looked between Wade and the Reverend with sharp, intelligent eyes. "But I think maybe I come at important time, yes?" "Mrs. Chen," Reverend Mills said, "would you be willing to serve as a witness to a marriage?" The woman's eyebrows rose, and she looked at Wade with an expression that contained both surprise and calculation. "The rancher and the auction woman?" "Yes, ma'am," Wade said. Mrs. Chen set down her basket and walked closer, studying Wade's face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read character quickly. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once, decisive. "I witness," she said, "that Jacob Voss is snake in man's clothing. If you protect her from him, you are good man. I witness." Relief flooded through Wade. "Thank you. But you need ring," Mrs. Chen said practically. "Cannot marry without ring." Wade's hand went to his pocket, where he still carried Mary's wedding band on a thin chain. He'd worn it around his neck for 3 years, unable to bury it with her, but equally unable to let it go. Now he pulled it out, the gold warm from his body heat, and stared at it. Mary would understand. He knew she would. She'd been practical, compassionate, fierce about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. She would have liked Clara, would have admired her strength, and she would have told Wade to stop drowning in grief and start living again. "I have a ring," Wade said quietly. Reverend Mills' expression softened with understanding, but he didn't comment. Instead, he opened his Bible and gestured for Wade to stand at the front of the church. "We'll do this properly, even if it's quick. Mrs. Chen, if you'll stand here as witness." The woman took her position, and Reverend Mills looked at Wade. "Now we need the bride." "Oh, she's at the ranch with her daughter. I'll bring them back." "No," Mills interrupted gently. "Jacob could be watching the roads. Better if I come to you. We'll perform the ceremony at your ranch, where Clara and Lily are safe. It's unconventional, but these are unconventional circumstances." Wade felt something tight in his chest loosen. "You'd do that?" "I would. Give me an hour to gather what I need and make arrangements. Meet me at the North Road out of town, and we'll ride together." Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. "I come too. Bring food for after. And my husband's mother's wedding shawl. Clara should have something special to wear, not just work dress." Wade's throat tightened at the kindness of it, these near strangers willing to risk Jacob's disapproval to help. "Thank you, both of you." The ride back to the ranch was slower with 2 additional horses, but Wade used the time to explain everything to Reverend Mills and Mrs. Chen. The auction, the fire, Jacob's threats, Clara's fear. By the time they reached the property, both of his companions understood exactly what was at stake. Clara must have seen them coming because she was on the porch when they arrived, the rifle lowered but still in her hands, Lily pressed against her side. Her eyes widened when she recognized the Reverend, then filled with something that might have been relief or might have been terror. Wade dismounted and walked to the porch. "I brought Reverend Mills to perform the ceremony here. Thought it was safer than making you ride to town. Mrs. Chen came too. She wants to witness." Claire's gaze shifted to the small Chinese woman, who smiled warmly and held up the bundle in her arms. "I bring shawl for you. Make pretty for wedding." Clara's composure cracked. She set down the rifle with shaking hands and pressed her fingers to her mouth, overcome. Wade stepped closer, not touching, but present. "You don't have to do this if you've changed your mind," he said quietly. "We can find another way." "No," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "No, I haven't changed my mind. I didn't expect kindness. From anyone except you." Mrs. Chen bustled up the porch steps, took Clara's hands in her own small ones, and said firmly, "You are good woman in bad situation. We help good women. Now come, let me make you ready." She led Clara inside while Reverend Mills and Wade waited on the porch. Lily stood between them, silent as always, but her small hand found Wade's and held on tight. He looked down at her, this little girl who was about to become his daughter in the eyes of the law, and made a silent promise that he would be worthy of that trust. Inside the house, Wade could hear Clara's soft voice and Mrs. Chen's practical responses, the rustle of fabric, the sound of water being poured. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, moving both too fast and too slow. Then the door opened and Clara stepped out. Mrs. Chen had worked magic with limited resources. Clara's hair was brushed and pinned back with wildflowers from the garden, and the shawl, deep red silk embroidered with golden birds, draped around her shoulders, transformed her simple dress into something that looked almost ceremonial. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but she stood straight and tall, her hands folded over her swollen belly. She was beautiful, not in the way Mary had been beautiful, but in her own fierce, wounded way. Wade felt something shift in his chest, something he wasn't quite ready to name. Reverend Mills cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" They gathered in front of the house, the 4 adults and 1 silent child, with the mountains rising behind them and the valley spreading out below. Mills opened his Bible, and the late afternoon light caught the gold edges of the pages. "We are gathered here in the sight of heaven, and these witnesses," Mills began, his voice carrying the weight of ritual and meaning, "to join this man and this woman in matrimony. Wade Harlan, do you take Clara Voss to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Wade looked at Clara, at the fear and hope warring in her gray eyes, and said clearly, "I do." "And Clara Voss, do you take Wade Harlan to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Clara's voice came out as a whisper, then stronger. "I do." "The ring?" Wade pulled Mary's wedding band from his pocket and held it out. For a moment, Clara stared at it, understanding what it meant that he was giving her this particular ring. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she extended her left hand. Wade slipped the band onto her finger. It was slightly loose, but it stayed. Clara looked down at it, then up at Wade, and something passed between them. Gratitude, promise, the beginning of understanding. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Mills said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, then added gently, "You may kiss your bride if she's willing." Wade looked at Clara, asking silent permission. She nodded, just barely, and Wade leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead, chaste, respectful, but undeniably tender. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands together, beaming. "Is done. Now you are family, all of you. No one can say different." Reverend Mills produced a marriage certificate from his bag and filled it out right there, using the porch railing as a desk. He signed it, Mrs. Chen signed it, and Wade and Clara added their names. Wade's signature bold and sure, Clara's shakier but determined. When it was done, Mills handed the document to Wade. "Keep this safe," he said. "When Jacob returns, this is your proof. Clara is your wife now. Lily is your stepdaughter. The baby will be born legitimate. He has no claim." Wade folded the certificate carefully and tucked it inside his shirt, next to his heart. "Thank you for all of this." Mills smiled. "Thank me by taking care of them. That's all the payment I need." Mrs. Chen insisted they share the food she'd brought. Rice cakes, preserved plums, tea that she brewed over Clara's cook stove. They sat together in the house that was now legally Clara and Wade's home, eating and talking quietly. Lily sat close to Wade, and at one point she leaned her head against his arm. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything. As the sun began to set, Reverend Mills and Mrs. Chen prepared to leave. Wade walked them to their horses, grateful beyond words. "Jacob will not accept this easily," Mills warned. "He'll claim fraud, coercion. He'll try to invalidate the marriage." "Let him try," Wade said. "We did this legally, with witnesses, by our own choice. He can't prove otherwise. Just be careful, Wade. Jacob Voss is dangerous when he doesn't get his way." "I know. We'll be ready." He watched them ride away into the gathering dusk, then turned back to the house. Through the window, he could see Clara clearing the dishes, Lily helping in her small, quiet way. His wife, his daughter, his family, strange and improvised as it was. Wade walked to the barn as he had every night, but this time Clara appeared in the doorway. "Wade," she called softly, "you don't have to sleep in the barn anymore. You're my husband now. You can sleep in the house." Wade stopped, considering. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "You won't." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, the red shawl still draped over her shoulders. "I trust you, and Lily trusts you. We'll make space." So Wade brought his bedroll into the house for the first time. Clara had already made up a place for him near the fireplace, separate from the bedroom but still inside, still warm. Lily was already asleep in the bedroom, curled up with her corn-husk doll, and Clara prepared for bed with efficient, nervous movements. "Clara," Wade said before she could retreat to the bedroom, "I meant what I said in the vows. I'll take care of you and Lily and the baby, not because I have to, but because I want to." Clara's eyes filled again. She seemed to cry so easily now, like the wedding had broken down some dam inside her. "I know." and I'll try to be a good wife to you, Wade. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I'll try." "It's exactly what I wanted," Wade said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "A family, a purpose, something worth protecting. You've given me that." She smiled then, small and fragile, but real. "Then I guess we've both saved each other." "I guess we have." Clara went to bed, and Wade lay down near the fire, listening to the house settle around him. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone. For the first time since the auction, Clara and Lily had real protection. And for the first time since Jacob Voss had started hunting them, they had solid legal ground to stand on. But Wade knew the real test was still coming. 3 days later, it arrived. Wade was repairing the fence when he saw the dust cloud on the southern road. Too many riders to be friendly, moving too purposefully to be passing through. He dropped his tools and ran for the house, shouting for Clara. She appeared on the porch, Lily behind her, and she saw the riders immediately. Her face went white. "It's him," she said. "Jacob's back. Get inside, lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Wade grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the porch railing. "And Clara, we're married now. Remember that. No matter what he says, you're my wife, and he can't change that." Clara nodded, grabbed Lily, and disappeared into the house. Wade heard the bolt slide home. He stood in the middle of the yard as 7 riders approached, Jacob in front, the sheriff beside him, and 5 other men Wade didn't recognize. They pulled up in a semicircle, boxing Wade in, and Jacob's face was twisted with fury. "Harlan," Jacob said, his voice tight with rage. "I've come to collect my family, and this time you're going to stand aside or the sheriff will arrest you for obstruction." "Your family isn't here," Wade said calmly. "My wife and daughter are inside, and they're staying there." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Your wife?" Wade pulled the marriage certificate from his pocket and held it up. "Married 3 days ago. Legal, witnessed, signed by Reverend Mills. Clara is Clara Harlan now. She's under my protection, not yours." The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle, squinting at the document. "That true, Harlan? You married her?" "It's true. See for yourself." Wade handed the certificate up, and the sheriff read it carefully. His expression didn't change, but Wade saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Jacob, meanwhile, had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "This is fraud," Jacob said finally, his voice shaking. "You coerced her. Took advantage of a desperate woman to—" "I did nothing of the sort," Wade interrupted. "Clara agreed to marry me of her own free will, with witnesses present. There's no fraud here, just a legal marriage that eliminates your claim to her. She was my responsibility. She was never your property," Wade said, his voice hardening. "And now she's legally my wife, which means whatever game you've been playing is over. Go home, Jacob. You've lost." Jacob's face flushed red, and his hand moved toward his gun. Immediately, Wade raised his rifle, and the sheriff's hand shot out, gripping Jacob's wrist. "Don't," the sheriff said sharply. "He's within his rights, Voss. The marriage is legal. You've got no claim anymore." "The hell I don't," Jacob jerked his arm free. "That baby she's carrying is evidence of her adultery." "That baby is my child now," Wade said. "Born to my wife in lawful marriage. Whatever happened before doesn't matter. What matters is what's true now, and the truth is Clara chose me over you. Accept it." For a long moment, Wade thought Jacob would ignore the sheriff, would draw anyway, would turn this into bloodshed. The tension stretched taut, everyone's hand near their weapons, the air thick with the promise of violence. Then Clara's voice rang out from the porch. "Jacob, stop!" Every head turned. Clara stood on the porch, Lily beside her, and she'd removed the bolt from inside. She stood tall despite her pregnancy, despite her fear, and her voice was steady. "You want to know why I married Wade?" Clara said. "Because he's never once made me feel small. He's never hit me, never threatened me, never treated me like something he owned. He gave me a choice, Jacob, an actual choice. And I chose him. Not because I was coerced, but because he's a good man, and you're not." Jacob's face contorted. "You ungrateful—" "I'm grateful," Clara interrupted. "I'm grateful Wade was at that auction. I'm grateful he had the courage to see what was wrong and fix it. And I'm grateful that now, legally, you can't touch me or Lily ever again." She moved down the porch steps, Wade shifting slightly to stay between her and Jacob. Go home. Find someone else to control. We're done here. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Jacob laughed, bitter and cold. You think this is over? You think a piece of paper changes anything? I'll make your life hell, both of you. I'll tell everyone what she is, what you've done. I'll destroy your reputation, Harlan. By the time I'm through, no one in this territory will do business with you.
I don't care, Wade said simply. Reputation doesn't keep my family safe. This rifle does. These boundaries do. And this marriage does. So go ahead and talk all you want. But if you set foot on this property again, if you threaten my wife or daughter again, I won't wait for the law. I'll handle it myself. The sheriff cleared his throat. That's enough from both of you. Boss, the man's right. The marriage is legal, and there's nothing you can do about it. Harlan, threatening violence in front of a lawman ain't smart. Both of you stand down before this gets uglier. Jacob stared at Wade with pure hatred, then at Clara with something worse. Ownership denied, control lost. But he was smart enough to know he'd been outmaneuvered. The marriage changed everything, and pushing further would only make him look like the villain Clara had just publicly named him as. This isn't over, Jacob said, his voice low and venomous. One way or another, you'll pay for this. I'm already paying, Wade said, with every day I spend making sure Clara and Lily are safe from you. Best money I ever spent. Jacob wheeled his horse around so violently the animal reared. His men followed, and the 7 riders thundered away in a cloud of dust and fury. The sheriff lingered a moment longer, his gaze moving between Wade and Clara. You've made an enemy today, Harlan. Jacob Voss has money and influence. He'll use both against you. Let him, Wade said. I've got something he doesn't. What's that? Wade looked at Clara, at Lily peeking out from behind her mother's skirts, and felt something warm and certain settle in his chest. People worth fighting for. The sheriff shook his head, something that might have been respect flickering across his face. Good luck. You're going to need it. He tipped his hat to Clara. Ma'am. Then he rode away, leaving Wade and Clara standing in the yard. Wade lowered his rifle and turned to Clara. She was shaking, her hands pressed against her belly, but her eyes were bright with something fierce and victorious. You stood up to him, Wade said. So did you. Clara's voice trembled. Thank you for all of it. Wade wanted to say something profound, something that would match the magnitude of what had just happened, but all he could manage was, You're welcome. Lily emerged fully from the porch and walked to Wade, her small hand slipping into his. She looked up at him with those steady gray eyes, and then she spoke, clear, quiet, but unmistakable. Papa. The word hit Wade like a physical blow. He looked down at Lily, this child who hadn't spoken in weeks, who'd just chosen that moment and that word to break her silence. His vision blurred and he crouched down so he was eye level with her. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice rough. Yeah, I'm your papa now. Lily nodded, satisfied, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Wade held her carefully, this fragile, brave little girl who'd just given him a gift he didn't know how to deserve. When he looked up, Clara was crying again, but this time she was smiling too. She walked to them and put her hand on Wade's shoulder, and for a moment the 3 of them stood there together, this strange, improvised family that had been forged in desperation and fear, but was becoming something real, something worth protecting, something worth everything. The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Wade stayed crouched there in the dirt, holding Lily, feeling the weight of what she'd just given him settle into his bones. Claire's hand remained on his shoulder, trembling, and when he finally stood, Lily stayed in his arms, her small body relaxing against his chest in a way that spoke of trust earned, not given. Let's go inside, Wade said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. They moved together into the house, and Wade set Lily down gently. The little girl immediately went to the table and picked up her drawing stick, but instead of dust sketches that disappeared with a breath, she pulled out a precious scrap of paper Clara had been saving and began to draw something deliberate, careful. Clara busied herself at the cook stove, her movements automatic but her hands still shaking. Wade could see her processing what had just happened, Jacob's retreat, Lily's first word in weeks, the reality that they might actually be safe now. He'll keep his word, Clara said suddenly, not turning around.
about making our lives difficult. Jacob doesn't make empty threats. I know. Wade leaned against the doorframe, watching her. But he can't take you anymore. That's what matters. He can still hurt us in other ways, spread rumors, turn people against us, make it impossible for you to do business in town. Clara finally turned, her face pale but determined. I need you to understand what you've taken on, what this marriage might cost you. Clara, I knew what I was doing when I asked you. Wade crossed the room and stood close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Whatever Jacob does, whatever anyone says, it's worth it. You and Lily are worth it. Her composure cracked. She pressed one hand to her mouth, the other to her swollen belly, and fresh tears spilled over. I don't know how to repay you for this. I don't know how to be worthy of— Stop. Wade's voice was gentle but firm. You don't owe me anything, and you're already worthy. You've been surviving impossible things with grace and strength. That's more than most people manage. But I've brought you nothing but trouble. You've brought me a reason to wake up in the morning, Wade interrupted. You've brought life back to this house. You've brought Lily, who just called me Papa, which is— His voice broke. He swallowed hard and continued, which is a gift I didn't think I'd ever have again. Clara stared at him, searching his face for doubt or resentment or regret. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy something in her because she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Wade wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her belly, and let her cry. He looked over her head at Lily, who'd stopped drawing to watch them with those two old eyes. The little girl didn't look afraid or confused. She looked relieved. After a long moment, Clara pulled back and wiped her face with her apron. I'm sorry. I keep crying on you. Don't apologize for feeling things, Wade said. You're allowed. She managed a watery smile. I'm not used to being allowed. The truth of that statement hit Wade hard. How long had Clara been surviving in situations where even her emotions belonged to someone else, where expressing fear or grief or joy was dangerous? Well, you're allowed now, Wade said firmly, to feel, to speak, to choose. That's what being my wife means, partnership, not ownership. Clara's smile steadied, grew more real. Partnership, she repeated, like she was testing the word. I think I can do that. I know you can. They spent the rest of the afternoon in careful domesticity, Clara cooking supper while Wade repaired the damage to the corral fence that he'd abandoned when Jacob arrived, Lily moving between them like a small ambassador of their new normal. The little girl spoke again that evening, just 2 words when Clara asked if she wanted more bread. Yes, please. Small words, polite words, but they rang through the house like bells. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching her drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house, Wade and Clara sat by the fire nursing cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm. What do we do now? Clara asked. Jacob's gone for today, but he meant what he said. He'll come back somehow. Maybe, Wade allowed, but each day that passes makes this marriage more real, more established. The longer we're together, the harder it'll be for him to claim fraud or coercion. So we just wait? Hope he gives up? Wade considered this. We live. We build something here that's stronger than his hate. We show everyone, Jacob included, that this family is real and permanent. Clara's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. The baby's due in 3 months, maybe less. Then we'll prepare. Make sure we have everything you need, that the house is ready. Wade paused. Have you thought about what happens after, about what you want? What I want? Clara looked at him like the question was foreign. I want to not be afraid anymore. I want Lily to grow up safe. I want this baby to have a chance. You'll have all that, Wade promised. But I meant, what do you want for yourself? Beyond survival, beyond safety. Clara was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee like the answer might be floating there. I don't know, she finally admitted. For so long, wanting anything for myself felt dangerous, like hoping for too much would make everything collapse. You can hope now, Wade said. You can want things. And if there are things I can give you, I will. She looked up at him, and in the firelight, her eyes were soft with something Wade was starting to recognize as affection. "What about you? What do you want?" The question caught Wade off guard. He'd spent 3 years not wanting anything except to make it through each day. But now, sitting here with Clara across from him and Lily sleeping peacefully in the next room, he found that he did want something. "I want this to work," Wade said honestly. "This family, this life. I want to be a good husband to you and a good father to Lily and the baby. I want to build something that lasts." He paused. "And I want to stop feeling like I'm just going through the motions, like I'm alive instead of just surviving." "You already are," Clara said softly. "Alive, I mean. I've seen it. The way you worked the ranch, the way you talked to Lily, the way you stood up to Jacob. That's not surviving, Wade. That's living." Wade felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "Maybe we're both learning how to do it again. Together." "Together," Clara echoed. And this time the word felt like a promise. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its ordinariness. Wade worked the ranch with renewed purpose, preparing for winter and for the baby's arrival. He repaired the bedroom thoroughly, sealed gaps in the walls, built a small cradle from pine he'd been saving. Claire continued transforming the house, sewing clothes for the baby from fabric Wade had bought, teaching Lily letters and numbers scratched in the dirt outside. Lily's voice returned gradually, like a spring thaw. She spoke mostly to Clara at first, single words or short phrases, but within a week she was talking to Wade too. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but it was there. And every time she called him Papa, Wade felt his heart constrict with gratitude and something deeper. 3 weeks after Jacob's confrontation, Wade rode to town again for supplies. He went prepared for hostility, for the rumors Jacob had promised to spread, for doors to close in his face. What he found was more complicated. Some people did turn away when he approached. He heard whispers, saw disapproving looks from the more religious townfolk who believed Clara's pregnancy was shameful regardless of the circumstances. But others surprised him. Mrs. Chen greeted him warmly and gave him baby clothes her own grandchildren had outgrown. Reverend Mills stopped him on the street to ask how Clara was feeling and whether they needed anything. Even the shopkeeper, while not friendly, sold him supplies without comment. The territory was too practical to fully ostracize a paying customer, and Wade's reputation as a quiet, hard-working man who minded his own business served him well. Jacob's attempts to turn the town against them had only partially succeeded, and Wade counted that as a victory. He was loading supplies into his wagon when he noticed Jacob across the street, standing outside the land office with 2 men in expensive suits. Jacob saw Wade at the same moment, and something cold and triumphant flickered across his face. Wade ignored him and finished loading, but unease settled in his gut. Jacob looked too satisfied, too certain. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't finished. Wade drove the wagon home faster than usual, and when he arrived, he found Clara in the garden with Lily, both of them weeding the fall vegetables. The sight of them, peaceful, safe, working together in the afternoon sun, eased the tension in his shoulders slightly. "Everything all right in town?" Clara asked, reading his expression. "Mostly, but I saw Jacob. He was meeting with some men who looked like lawyers or land speculators." Wade helped her to her feet, mindful of how much more difficult movement had become as her pregnancy advanced. "He's planning something." Clara's hand went to her belly protectively. "What could he do? We're married. The law's on our side now." "I don't know. But whatever it is, we'll handle it." The answer came 2 days later when a man in a dark suit rode up to the ranch carrying official-looking papers. He introduced himself as Mr. Thornton, a surveyor from the Territorial Land Office, and his expression was apologetic. "Mr. Harlan," Thornton said, "I'm here to inform you that there's a dispute regarding your property boundaries. A Mr. Jacob Voss has filed a claim stating that a portion of your northern acreage actually belongs to the Voss family estate, inherited through his brother Thomas. I'm required to survey the land and make a determination." Wade felt ice form in his stomach. "My deed is clear. I've owned this land for 8 years without dispute." "I understand, sir, but Mr. Voss has produced documentation suggesting the boundary was incorrectly recorded. I'm obligated to investigate." Thornton pulled out a map. "Specifically, he's claiming this section here, which includes your main water source and approximately 40 acres of grazing land. Wade looked at the map and saw immediately what Jacob was doing. If that claim held, Wade would lose access to the creek that fed his property, making it nearly impossible to sustain livestock through summer. The ranch would become worthless. "This is retaliation," Wade said flatly. "Jacob's trying to hurt me because I married Clara." "I can't speak to motives, Mr. Harlan. I can only verify boundaries and documentation." Thornton looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'll need several days to complete the survey. In the meantime, both parties should gather any supporting documents regarding the property." After Thornton left, Wade stood in the yard staring at nothing, his mind racing through possibilities. He'd bought the ranch from a man named Carlson who'd homesteaded it, and the deed had been properly recorded. But if Jacob had somehow found a prior claim or a recording error, if he had the money to pay lawyers to find technicalities. Clara appeared beside him. "What's happening?" Wade explained, watching her face pale as she understood. "If he succeeds, we lose the ranch?" "Not the whole ranch, but enough to make it unsustainable. We'd have to sell, move somewhere else." Wade's jaw tightened, which is exactly what Jacob wants. If he can't take you directly, he'll destroy everything around us until we have nothing left. "So we fight it." Claire's voice was hard. "We find our documents, we prove the deed is legitimate, I don't have the original surveyor's notes," Wade interrupted. "Carlson had them, and he died 4 years ago. His family moved east. I have the deed, but if Jacob's found something that contradicts it, something older or more detailed—" He stopped, frustration boiling over. "Damn it, I should have seen this coming." "You can't predict every move a vindictive man makes," Clara said, "but we can respond. Where would those surveyor's notes be? County records?" "Maybe, if they still exist." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "I'll ride to the county seat tomorrow, see what I can find. But Clara, this could take months to resolve. And Jacob has money for lawyers, for bribes if needed. I'm just one rancher." Clara took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You're not just one rancher, you're my husband, which means you're not fighting this alone." Wade looked at her, at the determination in her gray eyes, and felt something settle inside him. She was right. He wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Wade left before dawn for the 3-day ride to the county seat. He hated leaving Clara and Lily, especially with Clara so close to her time, but this couldn't wait. He made Clara promise to stay alert, to keep the rifle close, and to ride for Reverend Mills if anything went wrong. At the county records office, Wade spent 2 full days searching through dusty ledgers and property maps. He found his deed, properly recorded, but he also found what Jacob must have discovered, an earlier claim from 1867 filed by a man named Voss. The claim had been abandoned when the man moved back east, which should have nullified it, but the abandonment had never been properly recorded. Wade's stomach sank. This was the technicality Jacob needed. If he could prove family connection to that original claim, he could argue the land had never been legally available for Carlson to homestead. But Wade kept searching, driven by desperation and growing fury. And finally, buried in a different ledger, he found it. A notice of claim abandonment filed by Thomas Voss himself, 6 months before he died. Thomas had officially relinquished all family rights to the Northern Territories, including the land Wade now owned. Wade's hands shook as he copied the document. Thomas had done this deliberately, had made sure the Voss family couldn't use that old claim for exactly this kind of manipulation. Maybe Thomas had known what his brother was capable of. Maybe he'd been trying to protect Clara even then. Wade paid for official copies, got them notarized, and rode home as fast as his horse could manage. He arrived on the 3rd day to find Clara on the porch, Lily beside her, both looking worried. "You found something," Clara said, reading his face. "I found everything." Wade showed her the documents. "Thomas filed an abandonment notice. Jacob's claim is worthless." Clara's breath caught. "Thomas did this?" 6 months before he died. He must have known Jacob might try something like this eventually. Tears filled Clara's eyes. "He was a good man. Even at the end, even when he was dying, he was trying to protect me." Wade felt a complicated emotion. Gratitude toward a dead man he'd never met, who'd loved Clara enough to think ahead, to shield her from his brother's cruelty, even from the grave. "We need to show these to Thornton," Wade said. End this before Jacob can drag it out further. They found the surveyor still working the northern boundary, and when Wade presented the abandonment documents, Thornton's expression shifted from neutral to relieved. This settles it, Thornton said, examining the papers. The Voss claim was legally abandoned by the family heir. Mr. Harlan's deed is uncontested. He looked up. I'll file my report with the land office immediately. Mr. Voss's challenge will be dismissed. Wade felt tension he'd been carrying for days drain away. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank whoever had the foresight to file that abandonment properly. Thornton tipped his hat to Clara. Your husband was a thoughtful man, ma'am. He was, Clara said softly. That evening, Wade found Clara sitting on the porch steps, one hand on her belly, staring at the northern hills where Thomas had ensured she'd be protected even after death. You okay? Wade asked, sitting beside her. I'm thinking about Thomas, about how he must have known, even then, that Jacob would come after me, that he tried to stop it the only way he could. Clara's voice was thick with emotion. And I'm thinking about you, about how you're doing the same thing, protecting me, protecting Lily, even though it costs you. It doesn't cost me anything, Wade said. It gives me something. What? A reason to be better than I was, Wade said simply. 3 years ago, I would have walked past that auction. Would have told myself it wasn't my business. But you and Lily, you made me remember that turning away from suffering is its own kind of cruelty. You made me want to be the kind of man who steps up instead of stepping aside. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that still surprised Wade with its sweetness. We're good for each other, she said. Somehow, against all odds, we're good for each other. Yeah, Wade agreed. We are. 2 weeks later, on a cold November morning, Clara's labor began. Wade had been preparing for this, had talked to Mrs. Chen about what would be needed. But when Clara's face went white and she grabbed the table edge with both hands, Wade's carefully planned calm evaporated. It's time, Clara gasped. Wade, I'll get Mrs. Chen. Wade was already moving toward the door, but Clara's voice stopped him. There's no time, it's coming fast. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd helped birth calves and foals, but this was different. This was Clara, this was his wife, and the fear that something might go wrong was overwhelming. But Clara needed him steady, not panicked. Wade took a breath, forced himself calm, and moved to her side. Okay, tell me what to do. What followed was hours of intensity, unlike anything Wade had experienced. Clara's strength was terrifying and beautiful. She bore the pain with gritted teeth and fierce determination, squeezing Wade's hand hard enough to bruise, breathing through contractions that made her whole body shake. Lily, frightened by her mother's cries, hid in the bedroom at first, but when Wade went to check on her, she looked up at him with scared eyes and asked, Is Mama dying? No, sweetheart, Wade said, crouching down to hold her. Mama's bringing your brother or sister into the world. It hurts, but she's strong. She's going to be fine. Can I help? Wade considered, then nodded. Come on. Lily stayed by Clara's side, holding her mother's other hand, whispering encouragement with that soft, newly returned voice. And when the baby finally came, a girl, tiny and furious and absolutely perfect, Lily was the first to see her sister. Wade caught the baby in shaking hands, cleared her airway the way Mrs. Chen had instructed, and felt his world tilt when the infant drew breath and wailed. He wrapped her in clean blankets and placed her on Clara's chest, and the look on Clara's face, exhausted, relieved, radiant, was something Wade knew he'd remember until his dying day. She's beautiful, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Wade, look at her. Wade looked. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be gray like her mother's. She was perfect and impossible and real. What should we name her? Wade asked. Clara looked up at him, and in her eyes Wade saw everything. Gratitude, affection, trust, and something deeper. Something that might, given time, become love. Sarah, Clara said. After your daughter, if that's all right. Wade's vision blurred. He'd never thought he'd hear that name spoken with joy again. Never thought it could be anything but grief. But Clara was offering him something precious, not a replacement for what he'd lost, but a way to honor it. A way to let his first daughter's name live on in this new life they were building. "Sarah," Wade repeated, his voice rough. "Yeah, that's perfect." He helped Clara clean up and get comfortable, brought water and food, checked the baby's breathing and color a dozen times. Lily stayed close, fascinated by her new sister, asking quiet questions and touching the baby's tiny hands with wondering fingers. That night, with Clara and both girls sleeping peacefully, Wade sat by the fire and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. He'd become a father again, not just legally through marriage, but in truth. He'd brought a child into the world, had caught her in his own hands, had heard her first cry. And he'd done it with Clara, this woman who'd come into his life as a stranger and become something irreplaceable. The knock on the door came near midnight. Wade was instantly alert, rifle in hand, moving to the door with careful steps. Through the window, he saw a single rider, Reverend Mills, looking agitated. Wade opened the door. "Reverend, what's wrong?" "Jacob Voss," Mills said urgently. "He's at the saloon, drunk and raving about how you've stolen everything from him. He's got a gun, Wade, and he's saying he's going to settle this tonight." Wade's blood ran cold. He glanced back at the bedroom where Clara and the girls slept, then looked at Mills. "How long do I have?" "Not long. He was saddling his horse when I left. I rode hard to warn you." Wade made a decision. "Stay here. Protect them if I don't, if something happens. There's a rifle above the mantel." "Wade, you can't face him alone. I'm not letting him anywhere near this house." Wade checked his revolver, shrugged into his coat. "If I don't come back, make sure Clara knows. Make sure she knows I chose this, that protecting them was worth it." Mills gripped Wade's shoulder. "Be smart. Be safe." Wade mounted his horse and rode south toward town, his mind racing. He could try to ambush Jacob on the road, could wait in the darkness and end this with a single shot. It would be easy, justifiable even, with Jacob coming armed and threatening. But that would make Wade a killer, and it would give Jacob's memory a martyrdom he didn't deserve. No. This needed to end differently. Wade reached the midpoint between his ranch and town and dismounted, ground tying his horse off the road. He found a position with good sight lines and settled in to wait, rifle ready but not raised. Hoofbeats announced Jacob's approach, fast, reckless, the riding of a drunk man with murder on his mind. Wade stepped into this road when Jacob was 50 yards out, and the moonlight was bright enough that Jacob saw him and reined in hard. "Harlan!" Jacob's voice was slurred but venomous. "Come to save me the ride to your doorstep?" "Come to end this," Wade said calmly. "One way or another." Jacob dismounted, swaying slightly, his hand on his gun. "You've taken everything from me. My family, my land claim, my reputation, everything." "I haven't taken anything that was yours," Wade said. "Clara was never yours. The land was never yours. The only thing I took was your ability to hurt people who couldn't fight back. And yeah, I'd do it again." "You self-righteous son of a bitch," Jacob took a step forward. "You think you're a hero? You're just a fool who fell for a whore's lies." Wade's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Call her that again, and we'll settle this right now." "What are you going to do, Harlan? Shoot me? Go ahead. Prove you're no better than you think I am." "Bonnet might..." Wade saw the trap. Jacob wanted Wade to draw first, wanted witnesses to say Wade had been the aggressor. But Wade also saw something else in Jacob's eyes: desperation, defeat, the look of a man who'd lost everything he'd convinced himself he deserved and didn't know how to live with it. "I'm not going to shoot you, Jacob," Wade said quietly. "And you're not going to shoot me. You know why? Because if you kill me, Clara gets the ranch. The law's clear on that. And if I kill you, I go to prison and Clara still gets the ranch. Either way, she wins. She's free. You've already lost." Jacob's face contorted with rage and something that might have been anguish. "She should have been mine. Thomas promised. Before he met her, we talked about sharing everything. Brothers. And then he brought home that girl and forgot I existed. And there it was, the root of all this hatred. Not righteousness, not duty, but jealousy. Jacob had wanted what Thomas had convinced himself he was entitled to it, and when Clara refused to transfer that ownership, It had broken something in him. She's not a possession to be shared or inherited, Wade said. She's a person, with her own mind, her own choices. And she chose. First Thomas, then me. She never chose you, and no amount of law or force was ever going to change that. She would have learned to be afraid of you, to hate you? Yeah, probably. Is that really what you wanted? Jacob's hand hovered over his gun, trembling. For a long moment, Wade thought he'd draw anyway, that pride or rage would override reason, and this would end in blood. Then Jacob's shoulders slumped. His hand fell away from his gun, and he looked at Wade with empty eyes. I love my brother, Jacob said, and his voice broke. And I hate that he died, and I hate that she lived, and I hate that you just... He stopped, unable to finish. I know, Wade said, and found that he meant it. He didn't forgive Jacob, didn't excuse what he'd done, but he understood the grief that had curdled into something poisonous, understood how loss could make a man cruel. But it's done now, Jacob. It's over. Go home. Build a different life. Let Clara and Lily and the baby have theirs. And if I don't, if I keep coming, Wade's expression hardened. The next time I won't talk. I'll just shoot, and I won't miss. The threat hung between them, clear and final. Jacob stared at Wade for a long moment, then laughed, bitter, broken. You really love her, Jacob said. Don't you? Wade thought about Clara's strength, her courage, the way she'd trusted him when she had no reason to trust any man. Thought about Lily calling him Papa, about catching baby Sarah in his hands, about the family they were building from broken pieces. Yeah, Wade said simply. I do. Jacob nodded slowly, something resigned settling over his features. Then you win, Harlan. Congratulations. He mounted his horse, swaying in the saddle, and rode past Wade without looking back. Wade stood in the road, watching until Jacob disappeared into darkness, then waited another hour to be sure he wasn't circling back. When Wade finally returned to the ranch, he found Reverend Mills on the porch with his rifle, alert and worried. Thank God, Mills said when he saw Wade. What happened? It's over, Wade said. Jacob's going home. He won't be back. You're sure? I'm sure. Mills studied Wade's face, then nodded and handed back the rifle. I'll check on you folks in a few days. Make sure everything's settled. After Mills left, Wade entered the house quietly. Clara was awake, nursing the baby, her eyes red with worry. You went after him, she said. I stopped him from coming here. Wade sat on the edge of the bed. It's done, Clara. Jacob's finished. He knows he's lost and he's not going to keep fighting. How can you be sure? Because I saw it in his eyes. He wanted to hate me, wanted to justify one more try at taking you, but he couldn't. He knew, finally, that you were never his to take. Wade reached out and touched baby Sarah's tiny hand. We're safe now. All of us. Claire's tears fell onto the baby's blanket. I want to believe that. Believe it, Wade said. We're a family, legally and truly. We have a home, a future, and anyone who tries to threaten that will have to go through me. That includes Jacob, the law, or anyone else. Clara shifted the baby to her shoulder and reached for Wade's hand with her free one. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for choosing us when you didn't have to, for fighting for us, for... Her voice broke. For being the kind of man I didn't know existed. Wade squeezed her hand gently. You made it easy. All I had to do was see you, really see you, and the rest followed. They sat together in the lamplight, the baby between them, and Lily appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, sleepy-eyed. Papa? She said softly. Is it safe now? Wade opened his arms, and Lily climbed onto the bed, curling against his side. It's safe, sweetheart. We're all safe. Forever? Wade looked at Clara, at baby Sarah, at this little girl who'd learned to trust again. Yeah, he said, forever. And for the first time in 3 years, Wade believed in forever again. The winter came cold and hard, but the house was warm. Clara recovered her strength slowly, and Wade took over most of the household work without complaint, learning to change diapers and soothe a crying infant with the same patience he'd once used to gentle wild horses. Lily helped eagerly, proud of her role as big sister, and her voice grew stronger every day. By spring, the ranch was thriving. Wade had traded work with neighbors, built new relationships in town with people who respected a man taking care of his family. Jacob's rumors had faded, replaced by new gossip, and the Harlan name was spoken with increasing respect. One warm April evening, Wade found Clara in the garden, baby Sarah strapped to her chest in a sling Mrs. Chen had made, while Lily played nearby with a kitten that had shown up at the barn and decided to stay. Clara looked up when Wade approached, and she smiled, genuine, unguarded, happy. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the neat rows of sprouting vegetables. "Everything's growing." Wade looked at the garden, at his thriving family, at this life they'd built from desperation and fear. "Yeah," he said, "everything is." That night, after the girls were asleep, Clara found Wade on the porch and sat beside him. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air smelled like sage and new grass. "Wade," Clara said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, suddenly worried. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's what I need to tell you." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "For the first time in years, nothing is wrong. I'm not afraid. I'm not running. I'm just happy. Here, with you." Wade felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I'm happy too." "I know this started as a practical arrangement," Clara continued, "a way to protect us, to give us legal standing, and I'm grateful for that. But Wade, it's become more. For me, at least. And I need to know if you feel it too." Wade looked at her, at this woman who'd survived so much and was brave enough to risk her heart one more time. He thought about the moment he'd seen her on that auction platform and felt something dead inside him stir back to life. Thought about every day since, watching her transform from a frightened fugitive into a confident partner, watching her learn to trust, watching her bloom. "I feel it," Wade said. "I love you, Clara. Not because I have to, not because we're married, but because you're strong and kind and you make me want to be better. Because when I look at you, I see home." Clara's breath caught. "You love me?" "Yeah, I do." She kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, and Wade felt the last walls between them crumble. This wasn't a marriage of convenience anymore. This was real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you too," Clara whispered. "I think I have for a while. I was just afraid to say it." "Don't be afraid," Wade said. "Not anymore. Not with me." "I'm not," Clara said. "That's what I was trying to tell you. I'm not afraid anymore." They sat together on the porch, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, Lily and Sarah slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: fence to mend, crops to tend, the endless work of building a life. But they'd face it together, as partners, as family, as something neither of them had expected, but both had learned to cherish. Wade had bought two strangers at an auction because it was the right thing to do, but what he'd gained was immeasurable: purpose, family, love, and the knowledge that even the most broken things could be made whole if someone was willing to try. And Clara, who'd spent years running from a man who wanted to own her, had finally found a man who wanted to stand beside her instead. 2 years later, on a bright summer morning, Lily came running into the house shouting that someone was coming. Wade stepped onto the porch, hand instinctively moving toward his rifle, but Clara touched his arm. "It's all right," she said, shading her eyes against the sun. "I know that wagon." It was Mrs. Chen driving a wagon full of her extended family, coming for the celebration Clara had planned, a proper wedding anniversary party, because their first wedding had been rushed and small. Now, 2 years later, they wanted to celebrate properly, surrounded by the community that had slowly come to accept them. Reverend Mills arrived next, then 3 neighboring families, then more. People brought food, music, children who played with Lily and toddler Sarah in the yard. It wasn't everyone from Benton's Crossing. Some still disapproved, still whispered. But it was enough. It was family, chosen, and real. As the sun set and someone started playing a fiddle, Wade and Clara danced in their yard, Sarah giggling on Clara's hip, Lily dancing circles around them. And Wade looked at his wife, his true wife, in every sense that mattered, and felt gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, reading his expression. I'm thinking about that broken wagon wheel, Wade said. How if it hadn't cracked exactly when and where it did, I would have passed right through Benton's crossing. Would have missed everything. Clara smiled. Lucky wheel. Lucky us, Wade corrected. And as the music played and their friends celebrated and their daughters laughed, Wade Harlan finally understood what he'd been missing for 3 years. The simple, extraordinary miracle of being alive instead of just surviving. Of having people to love and protect. Of being home. Not because the house was special or the land was perfect, but because of who he shared it with. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder as they swayed to the music, and Wade held her closer, held all of them closer, and knew with absolute certainty that this beautiful, imperfect, hard-won family was worth every risk, every fight, every moment of fear. They'd all been broken when they found each other, but together they'd become whole. And that was the only ending that mattered,